The other day I went for a little walk along the beach at Bowlees Cove near Weymouth, and I found this curious object, which I think is a fossil. It does look like a fossil of some sort, but I'm not very sure what it is. It could be a piece of a crinoid stem. It could be a piece of an ammonite. It's got a segmented appearance to it. So on the face of it, looks like it might be a bit of an ammonite, except it just feels a bit more stony than some of the ammonite fossils that we get in this area. There is this, what appears to be like a little channel on the back of it there. So perhaps this was half of something that had a hollow centre. It could be a crinoid stem, a piece of crinoid stem. I don't know. But again, it's bigger. Well, it's bigger than some of the crinoid stems I've found before. And it feels a bit more stony than that. It is stone. It's not metal or anything like that. So I'm not entirely sure what this is. I will take some pictures of it. And I'll try and get you some good views of sort of end and cross section and all of that lot. And perhaps, especially if you're familiar with the fossils of the Dorset Jurassic Coast, perhaps you can tell me what that is.
So yeah, one thing I didn't mention actually is that's probably not a tooth. I think, whilst it does look like the ridges that you get on mammalian herbivore teeth, I think that is a Jurassic fossil, if it's a fossil at all. And I don't think the Jurassic herbivores had teeth like that. So I imagine that will look like a tooth to some people who are familiar with bovine teeth or elephant teeth or something like that. But I don't think it is. But my guess is that's a crinoid stem. But do let me know if you can confirm or if you've got other ideas. Anyway, it's time for the comment positivity section. And this is where I'm just going to pick out half a dozen comments that either asked interesting questions or uplifted me, made me smile, made me laugh, that sort of thing. So we're going to start off with, we're going to do this a bit differently because I'm going to kind of intersperse this with some answers in practical physical form. So the first one, this one's really good actually. This was on the fried chicken. I made a chicken sausage sandwich sort of thing on my budget challenge video. And I didn't know what to call it, so I called it What the Crock, because it was a bit like a croque monsieur, but obviously not ham. It was like a chicken patty with cheese in a toasted fried sandwich. Obviously, in hindsight, I should have called that crock-a-doodle-doo. So thank you for that suggestion. A couple of people suggested that one, but that was the first. Thank you very much for that one. Definitely that's going to be called crock-a-doodle-doo, and I think I'm going to revisit that because I've got some ideas on how to elevate that into a really, really fine sandwich. It was good enough as it was, but I've got an idea for how I can make that superb. Next one's a question. I buy Asda smoked salmon trimmings. What can I add to buck them out? I presume that just means kind of pad them out a little bit. So smoked salmon trimmings, really good value often because it's all the little bits and ends and so on that they cut off the salmon when they've been cutting lovely slices to put in those packs of beautiful smoked salmon slices. And of course, rather than waste that, they package up smoked salmon trimmings, which is all little odds and ends. And the price is usually quite reasonable. Now I'm going to be a bit of a heretic here and say that although smoked salmon is most usually eaten as it comes, so it's cold smoked, and essentially the texture is a bit like raw fish, which people love, obviously, and it's nice, I won't deny that. There's no reason why you can't cook that if you want to. And so I'm going to say that one of the ways I think we could make smoked salmon trimmings into something more substantial and really tasty is to make them stand in for bacon somewhere. It's a smoky, meaty, savoury flavour, and smoked salmon will stand in for bacon in a lot of contexts. So I think we'll go and try that right now.
So somewhat ironically, I couldn't find smoked salmon trimmings. Smoked salmon trimmings are the little bits that you left over with when you cut these beautifully orderly slices of smoked salmon and arrange them in a pack like this. But anyway, so we're going to do today's sandwich with the more expensive, although it still wasn't that expensive, version of smoked salmon. So smoked salmon is cured. It doesn't need further cooking, but you will find people out there who take it a bit further than that and say it should never be cooked. Well, we're ignoring that today, and I'm going to make something that is in the vicinity of a bacon, lettuce and tomato sandwich, a BLT. but with salmon instead, and I might swap out the leaves as well. So there are going to be people for whom what I'm doing today is an absolute travesty and should never happen. I want to talk about that a little bit more as we go along, because I think self-determination is one of the most important things a human being can have. The ability to decide for yourself what you're going to do, you know, with your food, with your life, with yourself, in any particular context. The ability to decide for yourself what you're going to do is one of the most important, perhaps the most important, human right. But why does that matter in the context of something as trivial as a sandwich? Well, I'm going to say it does, because here's the thing. Intolerance is a thing that manifests itself in lots of different ways. And there is evidence to suggest, there is research evidence to suggest, that the people who are intolerant of how you do little things are also intolerant of how you do more fundamental and important and life-changing things. And so, as a matter of principle, I think that people who get all up themselves about the right way to do a thing, I kind of feel like I have an urge to resist those people and say, okay, well, thank you, but no. Because whether or not you like it, we are all different. You know, we have things in common, but we are all different. And whether or not you like that, it's true. Therefore, what works for one person might not necessarily work for others. And what doesn't work for one person might be exactly what others have been looking for. And yes, I am talking about important things as well as trivial things like sandwiches or pineapple on pizza. Anyway, we've got some buttered slices of multigrain bread here, bit of cream cheese on that slice, and some bistro salad on that one, which is mainly these baby beet or chard leaves and some grated raw beetroot. I think that will go very well with what we're cooking today. Okay, we're going to get the tomato on there as well now. And I kind of want to get all of these bits done so the hot salmon can go straight on there. So whilst there are a variety of different contexts in which intolerance turns up, certainly in terms of food preparation, when somebody's saying here's the right way to do something, sometimes they are only saying here's a really good way to do something. And so there's no harm, I think, in listening to those people. But when it comes round to here's the only way to do something, I don't know. I just think, well, who are you to decide that? Who are you to decide that for me? Now, don't get me wrong. Cold smoked salmon, just like that, with some cream cheese on a bit of rye bread or something like that. Delicious. Absolutely lovely. Lightly poached or lightly cooked fish when the inside is still just slightly translucent and just enough to flake apart and the inside is still translucent. Gorgeous. Absolutely lovely. I will not deny. But just because those things are good, it doesn't mean this is going to be bad. So we're going to get that pan good and hot. A little bit of oil in there just to stop that from sticking. And then in with the fish. Now, unlike bacon, this won't take very long. So if I turn those over, we'll see, yeah, there's already a little bit of crispy edge happening on some of these pieces. So I don't want to break them up. And that's it. That's all it takes. And so that salmon, still piping hot, is just going to go on top of the sandwich there. And it has gone a little bit flaky, but that's not a bad thing in this sandwich. Anyway, so we will cut through that at a slightly jaunty angle. And there is the cross section of my yummy BLT style smoked salmon hot sandwich. There we go. Just going to have a few little sweet chili crisps on the side. Time to dig in while it's still steaming hot. That is a superb sandwich. So I think the moral of the story is don't completely ignore the people who are trying to tell you what to do, but have a think about whether they have your best interests at heart. Anyway, back to studio shrimp.
So next one, did your wall pennywort seeds take? So, good question. So I bought some wall pennywort seeds. If you're not familiar with wall pennywort, it's a plant that grows on damp walls, often in coastal areas in the UK. Don't think it's native, actually. I think it's probably introduced. And it's edible, and the leaves are very distinctive. I've in the past said it was a substitute for cucumber. what will be curious to me is whether it tastes like cucumber, because I can't eat cucumber anymore. It tastes horrible to me now. So I'm hoping that wall pennywort will taste nice in the way that cucumber used to taste to me, if that makes sense. Anyway, short answer, yes, the wall pennywort seedlings did take. I grew about 1,000 seedlings, and about several hundred of those survived to be planted. About probably a dozen plants have actually come through the winter. Maybe there's more to come up still. But yes, we have managed to get it, I think, established in the garden. We'll just take a little tour around the garden as I'm speaking, and we'll have a look at some of those wall pennywort plants. So, as its name suggests, it really does like growing adjacent to or on rocky walls. And so most of where I planted it was there, but the ones that have been right on the edge of a wall seem to have been the ones that have survived the best. So we've got maybe about a dozen plants of that in total in the garden. I've still got some seeds left, so I may just sow some seeds directly into situ and let them grow in spring. I did plant some along the top of the retaining wall in the frog sanctuary out the back of the kitchen through the scary door, but none of those seem to have taken. Probably just isn't the right conditions for them there. Anyway, so we've got a few plants, and I have allowed myself to pick one leaf to taste right now. And so here it is, wall pennywort. Now, I'll give you a close-up view of this, but needless to say, you need to be a little bit careful about picking leaves from the garden to eat, because certainly in my garden anyway, and in most gardens, a lot of the things that you could just pick and put in your mouth are toxic. So alongside wall pennywort, there are various other plants with similarly fleshy leaves that aren't necessarily very good to eat, or in some cases are toxic and would hurt you. So wall pennywort is not one of those, but it's quite easy to recognise because it has this stalk that emerges from the middle of the leaf, like a little umbrella, and the top surface of the leaf looks supposedly like a belly button. That's why it has one of its names is navelwort, and the Latin name is umbilicus, which again is the Latin name for a belly button. Anyway, that's probably enough waffle. I'm going to taste a little bit of this leaf now. Well, the good news is it doesn't have that awful cucumber flavour that I can't stand. Actually, that's really good. And I'm hoping that will stand in for cucumber in a lot of contexts because it's similarly fleshy. It's like the texture is like a thin slice of cucumber. It's kind of fleshy and a little bit of a soft, delicate crunch to it. The flavour I would say is like pea pods. It's like a very, very mild pea pod flavour. Like if you've ever eaten sugar snap peas. Tiny, tiny little bit of bitterness in the background that just sets it off nicely. But that's a tasty vegetable. So, assuming we can get that to thrive in the garden, you're going to be seeing that turn up in the context of salads and things like that in future videos. Next up, lots of questions about my mulberry bush. So I bought a dwarf black mulberry and it fruited at the wrong time of year. So somebody said, we've got a black mulberry, it's a patio one that's supposed to be a dwarf variety, but we planted it in the ground, it's not so dwarf now. It fruits twice a year. That's interesting because mulberries are related to figs, and figs fruit twice a year, so I suppose that makes sense. So yeah, maybe that was just the second fruiting of this mulberry. Somebody else asked, is this the Charlotte Russe variety? Yes, it is, I think so, or at least something very similar to that. In fact, when I saw it in the catalogue, I thought, that can't possibly be true. That can't be real, that picture, because often in seed and plant catalogues, when you have fruiting bushes, it just looks like they've superglued loads of extra fruit on. And I think sometimes they do, or do that digitally or whatever, just to make the thing look like it's a more prolific fruiting plant than it really is. Dishonesty, but it happens. Now the thing is, though, that this tiny, tiny little bush growing in a fairly small pot, I think it's like a 15 centimetre pot, produced quite a lot of fruit. So maybe in this particular case, that's how prolific those things are. And so, yeah, somebody else said, remove the fruit. The tree needs the energy to reset its clock and grow. Plant it out in its final place now that it's dormant. It needs the coolness to settle in. So I did remove the fruit. I removed the fruit late in winter last year. They unfortunately weren't ripe, and they weren't going to ripen because it was just too cold. But they were still red, and so I snipped them all off and threw them out on the ground, and the birds ate them. So now I've conditioned the local birds to expect mulberries in my garden, which means they'll eat them off the bush probably. But anyway, yeah, we're going to plant out that mulberry, so off to the garden now, and perhaps one or two other things. Right, springtime, we're going to plant some
trees and shrubs today, and I'm going to see what this compost is like in this big compost bin. The stuff at the bottom of here has been rotting down for at least 6 months now, and I have had a little scrape, and it's full and absolutely jam-packed full of worms, which in theory means it's all neutralized and there are things feeding on it. And right down the bottom of this there should be some lovely compost. So we're going to open up one side. I'm just going to pull out this pin here and open this like a gate. I think we'll shovel the top lot over to the back, and then we'll have a look and see what's down the bottom. So yeah, the top bit here is still got some rotting to do, but down the bottom here, look at this lovely dark well rotted compost, and that's only been in there 6 months, but the volume of it has heated it all up. Where it's quite a large compost bin, the volume has allowed it to retain a lot of its heat, and so that will speed up decomposition. So look at that, that's from the middle of the compost heap. And that doesn't smell at all unpleasant or anything like that. It's just black, crumbly, sweet compost. Really good. So the two things we've got to plant today is this, which is my loquat plant. It's gone all leggy, but I think it'll be okay. This is my loquat seedling. And we've got this, which is a dwarf black mulberry. This won't grow very big, but it's a kind of bushy thing, and it produces a lot of fruit. In fact, it fruited at the wrong time of year last year, so I had to cut the fruits off. They were still fruiting in November. But this is going to go over here somewhere. So I think the loquat will have on the back of this wall in the middle, and maybe the mulberry just down here. Right, hole is prepared. Now I've got to get that out of the pot and into here. There's some compost mixed with the garden soil at the bottom now, and then we'll just break up the root ball. The root ball's not too dense actually, so not very worried about that. So that will just go straight in there. Okay, so that's in there, and that's about the right level. So the level of the soil that was in the pot is level with the soil surface, the natural soil surface, which is about right. So that's where the loquat's going to live, and hopefully now it'll have a chance to really put its roots down and get properly established, maybe bush out a little bit and flourish, hopefully. This is a south facing wall as well, so hopefully that will just give it a little bit of protection from frost and just help it to really thrive. I'm not sure that we'll ever get fruit off of this, because this plant flowers in November and fruits in April, and that means carrying the fruit all the way through the winter. But if it does ever flower, I might make a tent over it and try and keep the frost off it and see if we can actually get some fruit. Right, and then this mulberry, same kind of deal. So that's just going to be down the hill a little bit from that one. I've dug the hole deeper and wider than the pot, because what I'll do now is I'll put a bit of compost in there, mix it with a little bit of soil, so it's got a transition between this non-soil based compost and the soil itself. And to help this one get going, a handful of feathers donated by local crows and pigeons. That will go in on top, and those feathers will break down slowly over the next few years, and will just provide a little bit of food for that plant. And then the rest of this compost in the barrow here, I think we're going to spread it all across the top of this border here as a mulch. Worms will take that down into the soil, and it will just help to feed and nourish this soil. Right, there we go, job's a good one. So mulberry, dwarf mulberry, loquat. This is a Saskatoon berry. At the back there we have a tayberry, which we're going to hopefully train up and across that fence maybe put a trellis on the top. Elderberries here growing in the side of the woods, and then up here we've got a gooseberry, supposedly thornless, but it's actually just a less thorn. And then the two blue honeysuckle, Russian honeysuckle berries, honeyberries or whatever they're called. I can't remember what they're called. So the notion is this whole slope here is going to be planted up with edible berries and fruits. So this is our little food forest. So there is just one more thing to do, which is to give these a really good puddle in, just to make sure. Well, this will help to settle down any little voids in the soil where I might have not compacted it down properly. We give those a good water in, trying to kind of wash the soil down into the gaps. The soil is very free draining here, so there's not much risk that I'm going to permanently waterlog these. Right, that'll do.
And then finally, my big compost bin, which you saw in that last segment, actually. So that huge compost bin, there's a video about where that came from. That's actually 2 compost bins joined together. So it's a modular thing. It comes in panels, and it's supposed to make a square section, sort of trapezoidal, truncated pyramid-shaped thing. I managed to fit 2 of them together by upending some of the panels and make it into an octagon, which has got about 5 times the volume of one of the original compost bins. And that's been really successful. So now we're just going to go and see what happens to the rest of that compost.
Right, furthermore, I'm going to get this compost out of here now. So I'm going to spread a big sheet of plastic on the ground down here somewhere and dig all of that kind of semi-rotted stuff off the top onto the plastic. The plastic sheet is really just so I can see where the compost ends and the ground begins when I decide what I'm going to do with it. Then we can get the really good compost out the bottom, which will go on the garden, in the greenhouse, and so on. We might put some of the semi-rotted stuff on the garden as mulch, or I might just put it back in here as the bottom layer that we can then put stuff on top of. So a little bit of strenuous work ahead. Most of what came out is this, which is the not so well rotted stuff. In fact, there's some living bits in there which I'll need to just chop up, and we'll put them right down the bottom and nature will take care of those. Most of what's left is well enough rotted that it can go in the garden now. Starting with the top bit, which is still a bit mulchy. So that top layer, I'll start taking that off into the wheelbarrow now. We'll spread that around the garden. We'll just spread it on top of the soil, around the shrubs and stuff, which will help to keep the weeds down. It will retain soil moisture and it will feed the soil as well. Okay, and you can see now I'm getting through that mulchy stuff into now what's a layer of rather nice looking, just black, crumbly compost. Look at the size of that earthworm. Absolute unit. So yeah, now we're down into this crumbly black stuff, which is just lovely compost. It's still got some rotting down to do, so it will still break down further in the soil, but that's good enough to go on the vegetable patch now. So we are going to do a form of crop rotation. Last year we had courgettes and pumpkins here, courgettes and squashes here, beans here, potatoes and leeks here. So this year beans have moved over to here, potatoes are not going to go in here. If we grow any potatoes, they'll be in the middle one. And with the beds in this close proximity, there's not an awful lot of point in doing crop rotation because the wind will just spread diseases around. But if any potatoes come up in here, I will know that they are volunteers or survivors from last year, and they could be carrying wet blight, which means I'll weed them out. We won't hopefully have blight already on site. So this being the place where we intend to grow courgettes this year, I've taken that black weed suppressant material off, and this barrel load of compost is just going to go in a big old heap on top of that raised bed. So we'll just dump that on there like that. And I'm not going to bother to dig this in, I'm just going to spread it out on top of the soil. The worms will mix that in for me. So I'm intending to build this up into a sort of mound. Look at all those worms in there. Those worms obviously will have a lovely time in the compost heap, but they'll be fine here because they'll help to carry this stuff down. They'll dig burrows and then they'll pull this compost down into the soil and eat it and then poop it out. And that's what makes really good soil. The earthworms will actually eat the organic matter and poop out basically plant food. But yeah, the notion is we'll make a mound in the middle. We'll plant the courgette slightly to the right hand side, which is the north face. And then because they want to grow towards the sunlight, so they'll grow that way, they'll grow up and over the top of the mound of stuff, produce their courgettes, and they might even put down little roots into the top of the mound as well. So that's the other half of that. So 4 barrow loads, 4 big barrow loads have gone onto this plot here, which is probably about equivalent to the amount of manure we put on there last year. I'll cover that back up, but also I'm going to put some of this compost in the greenhouse, because this year I'm growing my tomatoes in the greenhouse soil. And at the moment my plan is no more elaborate than that. I'm just going to toss a whole load of compost on that border. I might water it once in a while just to keep it moist. And yeah, there's not much point me digging that in, because the earthworms will do the work. So these guys in here, look at that. Earthworm, more like girthworm. Okay, so that's it. So 4 full barrow loads of this delicious compost have gone on this little one border here, where I'm going to grow maybe 5 or 6 tomato plants. And the weird thing is with this compost, this sort of compost mulch stuff, is paradoxically it will improve drainage but also improve moisture retention, because the plant material kind of acts like a sponge, but at the same time when the worms take it down and make all their little burrows, that creates drainage in the soil. And so you end up with kind of the best of both worlds, which is soil where when you water it, the water goes in, it doesn't just run off, but it doesn't just drain out the bottom either. While we're out here, let's just have a look at what else is happening. So broad beans, these are the ones we planted in autumn. Planted these in, I think, October, November, and they've been sitting there all winter. These plants should now make a strong start. I can see flower buds on that one there. And these will make a strong start, and we'll have some early broad beans. We're going to plant some more broad beans in there tomorrow, and that'll be our summer crop. This is going to be our spring crop. Rhubarb that we resisted picking last year, so this has just been growing and getting its roots down. Some lovely fresh growth on that. Great big fat bud there, just ready to burst and come up. So we should be picking rhubarb fairly soon. In this rhubarb plot, this is where I had loads of volunteer plants come up. So I had volunteer potatoes, tomatoes, all kinds of things. I do have these volunteer raspberries, which I haven't dug out yet, but I am going to dig these out. And I think we'll plant them in the woods. They are just self-seeded, semi-wild raspberries. But I think we'll dig them out, pot them up, grow them on a little bit, and then we'll plant wild or semi-wild raspberries off in the woods. And maybe we might get to pick some, or the birds might eat them all. Either way, all good. And so that's that big compost bin emptied out now, so we can see we're all the way down to the wire mesh that it's sitting on. So I will clean that up, rejoin those sides, and then this big pile of only semi-rotted stuff will go back in, and that'll be the bottom layer for the rest of the stuff we're going to fill that up with this summer, or spring and summer. There's another grow bag here, that one we hauled out of the greenhouse. I'll break that up and put that in there as well. And yeah, so we'll try and fill that up with shredded, it was mostly shredded ivy that we put in there, but all sorts of shreddings and whatnot from the woods here. And this little bit of woodland here, it's not a very big bit of woodland we've got, but it prolifically produces ivy. And there's some ivy needs peeling off the trees down there as well, which we'll have to get to. So yeah, we'll clear up all the ivy, we'll shred that up. That will go in the compost heap for next year's compost. It composts down really well, actually, this shredded ivy. That's what that bottom layer was. It was mostly ivy, a few shrubby prunings from the garden, all shredded up nicely and just thrown in there. Do unfortunately have to do that side up before I start shoveling things back in there, because otherwise these things will just open out. And if I piled compost against that, it would bulge outwards and I'd never get these sides together. Right, so that lot is now back in there, ready to form the base for next year's, well, this year's compost. Somewhere up in this elder tree, I can hear my little friend the robin waiting to come down, because there's loads of worms near the surface here now, so the robin will come down, have a feast. So that will, I think, do for today's exercise. Let's head back to Studio Shrimp.
Okay, so that's the end of that part. Now there is just one more little bit in this video, which is going to be just a walk around tour of the indoor market at Dorchester. When I go to Dorchester, I try and make it happen on a market day, and I had a little wander around. There's a very good fruit and vegetable market, but there's also a covered indoor market with bric-a-brac, antiques, collectibles, that sort of thing. And so I had a little wander around that market, and just with the camera switched on. I'm putting this, as I sometimes do, at the end of the video, because some people might not want to watch this. When I was editing the footage, just the way the camera works in the indoor setting did make me feel a little bit of motion sickness. And so this next video segment might not be for everyone. And for that reason, I've put it at the end of the video. So if you find that you have to skip or you don't want to watch it at all, there's nothing else to miss in this video. So that will be the end of the video. So I will say to you now, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.